He might just be the most interesting pastor in America. Douglas Wilson of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho is with us now. I'm James Polis. This is Zero Hour. Douglas Wilson is indeed the pastor of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. We'll get into what that means in just a bit. He serves on the board of 2 classical schools, count them, Logos School and New St. Andrews. You can find him writing on Blog and Moblog. How's that for a pun? Welcome, Douglas.
Good to be with you. But after that intro, I'm going to have to be interesting.
Yes, you are. It's in the contract. Yeah. Don't let us down. No, I have no doubt that this will be a very interesting conversation. You are, who would have imagined that Moscow, Idaho would be the epicenter of anything?
Who would have who would have thought? It was a sleepy little college town when my folks first moved there in the 70s.
So you've been there for a while. Went
Yes.
from sleepy college town to really, I think, the epicenter of a movement. Catch people up to speed on where things stand. And, there's been a lot of criticism going around. We don't have time to scale slowly. We don't have time to start at the ground floor. Right. You're proving that wrong.
So my dad moved there in 1971. I just graduated from high school. I helped him move there, was there for a few months, and then I went in the Navy and got out of the Navy in 75. So I've been there since 1975, and it was a blue dot. This terminology wasn't used then, but it was a blue dot in a very, very red state. It was blue because it was a liberal college town.
Sure.
And then Idaho is one of the most conservative states in the Union. So a sea of red and a little blue dot. And the upshot of it is that with the growth of the Christian community there, which has been really significant, the town has been going purple, but in the wrong direction. So the left is used to making red places purple, but this is going purple the other way. And that's been part of the genesis of the controversies, is that people don't like it. They wanted to be the Boulder of Idaho.
Well, when just having more than one child counts as turning town red, that's got to cut to the bone. How hard do you have to fight out there to turn red? Well,
it's in process, and it's not there yet. It's still a significant liberal presence, but we did a calculation a few years ago, and I'd say approximately 35% of all the school-age children are receiving a conservative Christian education now. So we're within shouting distance of the government school system going below 50%. I'd like to see that before I die. Conservative Christian education being supplied to the majority of the students, school-age students who are growing up there.
As that culture war has been heating up across the country, as it's gotten sort of rolled up into the presidential election, all the crazy things that the regime is doing, trying to transform this country into something that it's never been, there's been a lot of debate going on on the right among Christians about this sort of friend-enemy distinction, good guys versus bad guys. How do you treat the enemy? Yeah. Now, from one perspective, that's an easy question to answer as a Christian. But once you get into the rough and tumble of politics, things can get a little complicated. What's your counsel?
Yeah, so you have to know where you are. You have to understand the lay of the land. So if the Martians invade, then I'm with the other humans fighting the Martians. Right? If the Muslims invade, I'm with the Roman Catholics fighting the Muslims. You make alliances, and you have to make a distinction basically between allies and co-belligerents. So an ally is someone who's fighting the adversary that you're fighting for basically the same reason. And a co-belligerent is someone who happens to be fighting the enemy you're fighting, but for completely different reasons. So in the Second World War, we were fighting Germany as allies with Great Britain. We were basically on the same page. And the Soviets were fighting Germany for a completely different reason, because Hitler double-crossed them. They were teamed up at the beginning of the war. So they're a co-belligerent, and the U.S. and the U.K. were allies. And so you have to understand, in the melee of cultural collisions and politics, you're going to have alliances between, you're going to have, let's say Christians are doing something about pornography. They might find themselves in alliance with some old school feminists, right, who object to it. And in a political sense, there's an election. Sure, come along. At the same time, you don't want to tell lies for the sake of your alliance, right? You want to make sure that everybody there understands we're co-belligerents, and you don't become deluded about the situation you're in. So Stalin is not a Jeffersonian Democrat simply because he's fighting the Nazis.
Sure. Well, and right now, we've got some of those Christian denominations out there waving the flag of many colors. What do you do when it's internecine warfare among self-described Christians?
Yeah. So when it gets to that level, when ostensible Christian churches are flying the rainbow flag, I regard that as having gone over to the other team. Basically, I don't regard that as an intramural thing at all. So I'm a Presbyterian, not a Lesbiterian. So.
Is it too easy to call oneself a Christian in America today?
Way too easy. Yeah.
What do you do about that?
Well, what you do is instead of trying to take that term away from them for misusing it, I think I would just embrace the label and put your own stamp on it. A Christian is someone who follows Jesus Christ, period. He's not embarrassed by anything in the Bible. He will avow anything in the Bible. He is not going to back away or waffle or noodle. And I'm going to call myself a Christian, and I'm not going to be embarrassed by the lesbian Eskimo bishop doing her thing. She's going to be embarrassed by me doing my thing. Right? So she's going to have to put up with the association, and will have more trouble doing that than I do.
Do you think Christians have a bad reputation today?
Oh, yeah. But
think it's getting worse?
Yeah, it's getting worse. But a bad reputation doesn't mean that it's deserved, right? Sure. So I believe conservative Christians have been in the center of keeping America from committing suicide. At the end of Proverbs chapter 8, Lady Wisdom is speaking, and she says, "All who hate me love death." And I believe that that's in a capsule what's going on in our country now. We are at war with the culture of death. The culture of death is either abortion or the barrenness of homosexual relations, or the environmentalists who say that human beings are pollutants, polluters. So God gave you lungs to breathe in His good clean air and breathe out what the plants need, and they do the opposite, and that's been turned into a problem. Well, why? Because all who hate wisdom love death, and so we're in a pitched battle with a death cult, as I see it, and we have to be prepared to face that fact.
So, I think one of the reasons why Christians do have a bad reputation is there are just so many sects, so many different factions. There's splintered churches, and it's hard to muster a kind of authority when someone can say, like, well, your church is 5 weeks old. Why should I listen to you? Or, your church looks more like a rock concert than it does like a church. Do you think that you're a Presbyterian, so you probably are kind of two minds about this. Do you think there's a prospect to get some greater unity amongst the churches?
Yes, but I would add a qualifier to this. I've been a critic for decades of a lot of the foolishness that goes on in pop evangelical circles. I think there's a lot of foolishness, and I believe that when we get attacked for that kind of thing, it's deserved. We do some silly things, but I don't think that that's the reason we're being attacked. I think we are attacked with those things, but we're not being attacked for those things. The secular left doesn't care that Baptists have a different view of baptism than Presbyterians do. They don't care about that. But they'll seize on that and use that to attack us with. But they're not attacking us for that. What they're doing is they're attacking us for our resistance to the sexual revolution. So there's a battle going on in the Southern Baptist Convention. There's a battle going on in the PCA, the Presbyterian Church of America. But the conservative, faithful believers in both denominations get along great with each other. We understand that we're in the same fight. It's the same battle. And the secular left can say, well, you don't agree on infant baptism, or you don't agree, you're in two different denominations. But that's not the reason they're upset with us. The reason they're upset with us is our opposition to the progressive agenda. We're in the way.
When you're talking about fighting that battle together, just lay out a little bit what that looks like. I mean, you mentioned invasions and kind of who you ally with in case of an invasion. Well, you know, you look down at the border or what's left of it, and that's a full-scale invasion. Now, of course, not all of those people, probably, you know, definitely not most of them are interested in waving a scimitar around and hacking anyone's head off. But when you've got a free-for-all down there, it's definitely a problem. There's definitely violence, definitely bad guys flowing across.
Absolutely.
On a scale that dwarfs the population of many states. So what is your sort of reaction to that? And then how do you think you can create or foster an alliance that can respond to that magnitude of a crisis?
So fortunately, we're at it's gotten to a magnitude that pretty much everybody sees it. And even Joe Biden has to pretend to see it now, right?
Right.
After 3 years, he goes to the border now.
Staggering around down
there. So he has to pretend to act like it's a problem because everybody sees what a glaring problem it is. And the central part of the problem is the out-of-controlness of it. That's the issue. I mean, this was a nation built by immigrants. Why would we object to immigrants? I don't object to immigrants. I object to anarchy. The issue is anarchy. The issue is the rule of law. The issue is process. And if you're not in control of your borders, then you're not in control at all.
Yeah. Okay. So when you've got these different denominations of Christians, whatever you want to call them, is there a path for activating these communities politically that does allow them or give them the opportunity to coalesce around battles that can be won?
Yes, I think I do think there's a path, but the path is not going to run through denominational headquarters. You know, it's not going to be an ecumenical council that hammers out some joint statement on immigration or anything like that. It's going to be the rank and file parishioners who have eyes in their head and who have access to alternative news outlets, who are no longer limited the way it was when I was a kid to the big three networks, and you know, there's three networks and one local news station, and that was it. And there was the big newspapers, and that was it. Now the gatekeepers don't have the same stranglehold on the information that the people get, and that includes people in these churches. So in these various denominations, a lot of people among the Southern Baptists, a lot of people among the Presbyterians, a lot of people among various denominations are being taught and educated from a similar biblical worldview perspective that isn't explicitly denominational. So I'm a Presbyterian, and I'm on my way. I'm here in Dallas because I'm on my way to a conference organized by Baptists. There's a rough and ready coalition that's operating, yes.
Mm-hmm. What's at the top of the agenda?
Of this conference? Yeah. Christendom 2.0.
Okay, so what was 1.0?
Was roughly 500 AD to 1500 AD. That was Christendom 1.0.
And then something happened.
Then something happened, which was the Enlightenment. Basically, Renaissance and Reformation were two sides of the same sort of movement, and then the Enlightenment, basically progressive thought. I would trace most of our modern woes back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 1700s. So at that point, a certain toxin got into the culture of the West, and that toxin has spread and destroyed an awful lot of things, and a lot of Christians were sort of resting on their laurels. They were content with the externals of Christendom. So the externals of Christendom continued down into my lifetime. So I remember praying in government schools. Mm-hmm. But those were vestiges. Robust, believing Christianity was probably active down through the 18th century, and there have been sporadic Reformation revival type of things. But for the most part, it's been since the publication of Darwin, you've had a lot of the elites, the ruling elites, are basically thoroughly secular, atheistic, materialistic.
You can go after Rousseau and the philosophers. You can go after Darwin and scientists. You talk about Christianity 2.0. That sounds like a tech term. You can go after technology too, right? You can look at the printing press. Just the magnitude of the impact that the printing press had on theology, on culture, on politics, on ideas of nationalism.
And the internet is the same sort of thing today.
That's right. So you look at the destruction that was wrought by the printing press. I mean, today, we can say, oh, books, I love books. They smell so nice and I learn everything. Who doesn't like a good book? Well, when the printing press landed, it had disastrous consequences in many respects. How do you square that?
I would say, I would point to it as an example of creative destruction and destructive creativity. All right. So there is such a thing as anarchy that is just bad, right? But there's also an ossified, frozen conservatism that's also bad, right? So there are many situations where everybody's been, your culture is this mausoleum. Everything's stuck and frozen, and something needs to shake it up, right? And of course, wars and controversies and invasions and those sorts of things are disruptive, but they also prevent certain things from happening, right? So if you compare the Byzantine Empire with the West, there was a lot more chaos in the West than there was in the East. The Byzantine Empire continued on century after century until it just died. Right.
Well, it was a lot of fighting to keep the other guys from overwhelming those lands.
Right, but they were intact until they just stopped one day. In the West, there was a certain vigor or a robustness that came from all the struggle, all the turmoil. So the turmoil is turmoil. The challenges are challenges. And, you don't want to sugarcoat them or say that they're actually good things. But you can have good things come out of hard times. Good men come out of hard times.
One of the things that I'm concerned about in this respect, when you talk about that conservatism that kind of turns into a kind of stagnation, is coming out of the printing press. It had all the effects that we've just been talking about, but it also really created a sort of mystique around the book, and I think it led many people. I'm not here to sort of bag on those who lived during those transformational times, but it's understandable, but it also went, I think, in a very extreme direction where many people began to see the book itself as a kind of idol, and where the temptation was to vest so much authority in the Bible that other elements of church life started to fade and become weaker and sort of lose authority. Do you think that the Bible has become too important in a certain respect to Christians?
I would say the Bible as a thing that you buy and put on the shelf and revere but don't read, I think if you were to ask me, do I think that there's such a thing as bibliolatry, where you just bow down and worship the book? I think there are people who do that. And Jesus referred to them. He said, you search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it's they that bear witness to me. So the people he was up against were so focused on studying the Bible that they missed what the Bible was talking about. So this mistake is when people stare at the Bible as though it's a mural instead of looking through the Bible as though it's a window. The Bible's talking about God and Christ and truths. And we should look through the Bible to the actual things themselves, to the genuine life in Christ and what true community in Christ is supposed to be like. So we look through the Bible, and then that has to be applied. But if you just say, oh, we're going to do what we're going to do, and the family Bible has an honored place on the coffee table, right? That kind of bibliolatry is a problem, and it has been a problem throughout all of history. But there's nothing, human beings can make an idol out of anything. I mean, absolutely anything. They can make an idol out of the Bible. They can make an idol out of their pastor. They can make an idol out of the church. They can make so whenever there's a reaction to some previous folly, somebody's going to establish that he's going to bring in a good reform, and then some people are going to grab that and make it too important. So Martin Luther once described humans as the drunk who falls off the right side of the mule, and the next time you make sure to fall off the left side, just to keep things even. Mm-hmm. Well, we careen, and if our job as Christians should be to keep the car on the road, and if we veer into the right ditch, that's bad, and if we veer into the left ditch, that's bad. But if I'm climbing out of the right ditch, to the other people in the right ditch, it looks like I'm getting dangerously close to the left ditch because I'm heading toward the left ditch. And if I'm in the left ditch, climbing out of the ditch, they think I'm heading toward the right ditch. And I would say, no, we're just getting back on the road.
They say that good men create good times. Well, the same's true of businesses. Good people are the bedrock of successful enterprises. But unfortunately, today, the hiring pool is bleak. Political demands, petty entitlement, open incompetence, they're all commonplace. You need to reach the people who are keen to join your business. New Founding has created a network of these high excellence professionals who are seeking to join grounded, pro-American businesses. These are individuals often in elite organizations who are ready to go for a team and a mission that supports their values instead of working against them. Aligned companies are using this network right now to hire high-trust, exceptional individuals who match the culture and the mission of their teams. Join the New Founding Talent Network. Find your next hire. Apply for access to the New Founding Talent Network at newfounding.com/talent. You'll get connected with the candidates who will build up your business. That's newfounding.com/talent. All right, so we did the book, we did the printing press. Obviously, radio had a big impact on pastoralism and how Christianity was sort of spread and circulated in America. Obviously, television, televangelism, prosperity gospels, mega churches, that whole thing. I'm fast forwarding a little bit because I want to really get into digital. I want to get into the internet. Whether we're on a 2.0 or 3.0 or, things are unfolding very rapidly and a lot of Christians are being thrown back on their heels. How do you help Christians understand how to process what's going on with digital technology?
One of the first things we have to grasp about this is that in this era, we are dealing with billions of people, millions of people, and then billions. When we look back at previous eras, for example, in the colonial era before the American War for Independence, when George Whitefield preached in New York, he was a great revivalist, it had about 40,000 people in it. So the town I live in is a small town in Idaho, and we've got maybe 24,000 people in it. And the major centers, like in the Reformation, Heidelberg had like 50,000 people in it. And this before refrigeration and transportation, cities were limited in the size that they could be because of transportation of food and things like, simple things like that. Well, all of a sudden we are faced with, as Christian preachers, ministers, we are faced with the problem of magnitude. How do you get the gospel to hundreds of millions of people? We're dealing with mass communication, and if you're not doing mass communication, somebody else is. Right? So if you don't have Christians filling up stadiums and building their own cable networks and communicating via YouTube, if you don't have that, you're just ceding the territory. And there will be various globalists and politicians and statists they're going to talk to the millions of people. So basically, you have to dance with the one what brung you. Here we are. We know what we know. We have the message. We have the truth. We have the scriptures. And there are all these billions of people out there. Well, what do? I think you have to utilize the tools that you have without being dazzled by them or get into like the idolatry problem with them.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I understand when Christians come to me and they say, like, I want no part of this. I don't want to learn how to use Bitcoin. I don't want my kid to have a smartphone. I want to live in the woods. Leave me alone. And, I'm not here to say, no, you must not do that. I mean, look, we need monks. We need monasteries. We need people who are prepared to go off into the desert and live in silence and speak directly to God.
There was a time when people could flee to America. you could do that.
Yeah.
Right now, there is no place to flee to.
Yeah.
If you go off into the woods, they will find you.
That's right. And the promise that those guys are making is very clear, very straightforward. We are going to build a substitute paradise on Earth. We are going to use technology to do it, and we're going to onboard you into that system regardless of whether you want to be there or not.
Right.
So the Christian answer to that, yes, you can live certainly a virtuous, a holy life without touching any of this stuff, in the same way that you can do so without touching a book or without touching a pen, right? But these are tools. And the tools themselves are not inherently good or evil. They don't feel good or evil the way that we do. They're not ensouled. They're oftentimes they're not even incarnate. They're just code sort of floating around in ether. If Christians don't lay their hands on these tools, the other guys are going to do it, and we know exactly what they want to do with them.
Right.
So how do you break through that hesitance? Because it's true, you don't want to chain yourself to a machine in order to make sure that the other guys don't chain you to the machine.
Yeah. You don't want to lock yourself up in a Dilbert cubicle for Jesus.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So the thing I found is, and I love the title of your book, by the way, Human Forever, because that's the thing that we have to hang on to, is our essential humanity. We're created in the image of God, and God created us to live in His image in community. All right. So what we need to do is the opposite of what the transhumanists want to do. What they want to do is they want to upload us all into the singularity where we can live in their idea of paradise. And what we need to do is take these same tools and use them to bring us closer together with other human beings face to face. Right? So a tool, digital technology, can drive people apart, where you see a bunch of people, a family around the dinner table, everybody with the earbuds in on their phones. Well, clearly, that family is a dysfunctional family because the technology is being used to drive the family apart. Okay? But you could have the same family, same number of kids that use that technology to stay in touch with one another throughout the day in ways that our great-grandparents would never dream of doing. And that's the way it is with my wife and our kids and our grandkids. We have a chat group called Parliament of Owls, and everybody's talking to everybody else all day long, right? And then we get together face to face. And so it's the same technology is used to reinforce or tighten an actual human relation, to tighten the community bond. So if one of the girls is up in Spokane shopping, nearby city, and they see, I think my sister-in-law might like this, you take a photo of it and text it. Would you like me to pick this up for you? That kind of technology tightens the weave. It tightens the weave. But you can also use the same technology to blow it all to smithereens. Everybody grabs their ramen in the kitchen and heads off to their bedroom to watch their own TV. Well, the problem is the use of the tool. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And I would say we can go beyond communication, beyond talking and sharing pics and information. We can build things.
Right.
Computers, computation, GPUs, Bitcoin, these are tools that allow us to actually build institutions.
Correct.
That do the things that we want them to do, rather than being sort of the passive recipients of a social credit system.
And what we want to do is carve out spaces that the globalist elites can't get into, right? And at the center of it will be people, communities, worshiping communities, churches, and that's what it's all about.
I think about the 40 holy martyrs back in the Roman times, and there's Roman civil war going on, and Constantine, yes, you can be Christian, and the other guy said, no, that's bad. And so the bad Romans come in, and they find these Christians, and basically say, like, okay, you are now going to worship the pagan idols, or else it's going to be the end for you. And how do the Christians respond? They say, look, we pray for you. We pray for the success of your government. And we're not going to worship the idols.
Right.
When the regime crosses that line
Right.
from doing government to doing imposing religion,
Right.
violating the Christian way of life,
Right.
that is where it's a no.
That's where it's an absolute no.
Yeah.
Right. Because what this boils down to is the late Francis Schaeffer taught us that if there is no absolute over the state is absolute.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's a line that Christians may not cross. Right. We cannot acknowledge the state as the final and ultimate authority in our lives. We respect the state. Where the Bible says to honor the emperor. We should pray for the king. We should be the best. We should be the best citizens that they ever thought of having. On the one hand, but there's a line that we will not cross, and so Christians are not scofflaws. But when you get to a certain point, they will be the fiercest opponents of an idolatrous regime. They will not bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue.
And believe me, I understand. There's the theocratic temptation can be strong when you look around and you say, oh, like virtue is gone from the land and we're going to be scourged, and we need to combine state power and the power of the church into one thing. Otherwise, all is going to be lost. I understand that temptation. That's not what the church tells us, though. That's not what Christ tells us.
Right.
And that's a hard lesson, but it's one that has to stay with us, doesn't it?
Yeah. The state is no Messiah. The state is not Jesus Christ, and cannot be, shouldn't try to be. And neither is the church Jesus Christ. The church is the body of Christ, but and this is a very important lesson going back to the American founding, because I believe they really understood this. If you look at the Constitution of the United States carefully, read through it carefully, the one thing your big takeaway is never trust an American. never trust especially an American politician, because they divided the power, executive, legislative, judicial. Then you had the federal system with all the states. What they did is they said, men are sinners, basically. What it boils down to is a basic doctrine of Christianity is men are sinful, as Lord Acton put it, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So C.S. Lewis said that there are two kinds of Democrats, small d Democrats. One says that everybody's opinion is so valuable that we've got to consult everybody before we do anything. And that's the get out the vote left wing. We've got to consult with everybody. That's why we have universal suffrage. The Christian says, no, everybody is so broken and so corrupt and so prone to sin that we want to spread the power as thinly as possible over everyone to keep any one entity, whether it's this branch of government or that one, or the family. There have been eras where tribal patriarchalism, the tribal warlords were running the show. Mm-hmm. There was a time in the medieval period where the church was running the show. And there are times in our era where the civil government is swollen and bloated and wants to run everything. So they want to be, so when there is no, if we deny the absolute above the state wants to become God, and they want to take on the prerogatives of deity. They want to be omnipresent. Mm-hmm. They want cameras at every intersection. Mm-hmm. They want to track every keystroke.
And AI is the perfect tool to achieve that kind of false omniscience.
And what that is they're aspiring to sit in God's throne. That's what they're wanting to do. And that includes God's prerogative of wrath. They want to visit wrath on the racist or the person who isn't playing ball, who isn't cooperating with their program. They want to be able to say you, and what it boils down to is Orwell's nightmarish scenario. They can visit the wrath of the state deity on you. Yeah. But that's simply because they won't recognize a God above them.
So let's break the seal then and talk about how Christian nationalism fits into all this.
Okay.
It's become a total buzzword now. Obviously, it's even trickled all the way up to Biden administration officials who are latching onto it as their latest term of abuse. I guess MAGA is still too enjoyable to too many people, so they got to find something to beat people over the head with. I've had some authors on, Aaron Wrenn, Stephen Wolfe, guys you probably know, and this started out as just kind of a few guys on the internet talking, and now it's become national news.
Now it's a thing.
Funny how that happens. What's your take on it? Do you find it to be a useful term, a constructive term, and where do you think this debate is headed?
I find it a useful term. I'd say a B- term, somewhere in there.
Above average.
Above average, and I'm willing to work with it, because I prefer it to the other terms that get thrown around. I prefer it to white supremacist. I prefer it to theo-fascist. I prefer it to racist bigot. Okay, so Christian nationalist. It's simply there are three basic forms that human government can take. It can be globalism. I don't want that. It can be tribal, like in Somalia, where you've got a failed state and warring tribes. Or it can be national. So those are the three basic forms: tribal organization, national organization, various nations, or global, a global government, national governments, or tribal governments. Now we have nationalism now. We're currently divided up into various nation states, and all I'm saying with American national, let's make America Christian again. The only thing I'm saying about that is I think America ought to stop doing things that make God angry. Why? There are things that we do that make
highly controversial proposition.
Yeah. What are you, a preacher? Well, yeah, I am a preacher, but I think we ought to stop making God angry. I think the tens of millions of children who died in the abortion Holocaust make God angry, and we did that. And we called it a constitutional right. So I think we should stop making God angry. Now, what happens is people are spooked by the term nationalism. They're spooked by that because they say, "Oh, that makes me think of Nazis," because nationalist was part of the Nazi party name. Mm-hmm. And I say, okay, yeah, but so was socialist, part of the Nazi party name, and that doesn't even slow Bernie down, right? Socialism is so the problem with the Nazis was that it was pagan nationalism. Right? It was a nationalism that made God more angry. I'm talking about a nationalism that says, look, why don't we corporately agree together as Americans to stop angering God? And there are plenty of things that we do that make him angry. And we should stop that. And I don't see why that would be controversial. Now, if someone says, yeah, but I'm afraid if you Christian nationalists get in power, you're going to start persecuting other denominations or something like that. And I'd say, well, if we did that, let's say your nightmare came true. If we did that, would that make God angry? If they say, yeah. And I say, so do you think we should stop making God angry? Well, yeah. And I say, well, welcome to Christian nationalism.
Well, I think the scare point for people is if you start writing and passing laws that are not civil laws, but are in fact, an attempt to write religious commandments into the civil code. Yeah, Alexis de Tocqueville goes over this in Democracy in America, and he has a lot of nice things to say about the Puritans. But he says, they write Deuteronomy into the civil code, and it doesn't work out very well. And they quickly learn that you gotta find a different way to do your lawmaking.
Yeah, true, because there is a distinction between sins and crimes. Mm-hmm. Okay, something can be sinful, like covetousness, and I don't want the government making a law against covetousness, right? So we have to have a distinction between sins and crimes. But the thing that I use the phrase Christendom 2.0, there were some things that we learned during the rollout of Christendom 1.0. There were some bugs in the system. And one of the bugs was this blurring of the difference between sins and crimes. Mm-hmm. I think that there were things that we learned there that we shouldn't do again. So I'm not saying that everything that happened in Christendom the first time we should do again. I don't want the Spanish Inquisition again, right? But if we learn from those things, we should say, okay, let's not. If the whole project is to stop making God angry, then let's not make God angry with that kind of blurring of a distinction. The thing that's important in America, Christendom, the kind of Christendom I'm talking about, is in 1892, the Supreme Court of the United States issued a decision that was exquisitely named Holy Trinity versus the United States. Holy Trinity was the name of a church. And they had called a pastor, a British pastor, and they paid his passage over, which violated a law that Congress had passed against bringing a bunch of construction workers, say, over, paying their passage, working on your project, and then releasing them into the country. So there was a law against it. But some prosecutor went after this church for calling a British minister, which was not the intent of the law at all. So the Supreme Court handled that case in a common sense way. If you read the decision, Chief Justice Brewer was the justice at the time, the Chief Justice at the time. It's a very common sense solution. And then they said, but while we're on this subject, let's go over all the reasons why America is a Christian nation. Okay, and they went back to the fundamental orders of Connecticut, the settlements, went through the history of the United States, and said in 1892, this is a Christian nation. This is a Christian nation. Now, the thing that I want is the way we were in 1891. That's what I'm after. A recognition there's a God above us, that we have an obligation not to anger him. We have an obligation to respect his word. And so we shouldn't say that we should, if someone said, I want a nation where the state tells us whether to baptize infants or not. No. That's an ecclesiastical decision. Or I want a law against covetousness. You know, these glossy catalogs are stumbling people. No, right. I don't want a law against covetousness. That's a sin and crime thing. But I don't want a separation of morality and state. There's a difference between the separation of church and state, which are two different governments, and the separation of morality and state. What we've done is we've muddled those things. So in the name of separation of church and state, we've separated morality and state. And now that we have a godless state running amok with no sense of responsibility to God or man, we say, how did this happen?
Well, they've got their own sort of woke concept of morality, and they want to wire that into the state.
That's right.
They want a theocracy of a different kind.
Correct. All law, every kind of law, is always the imposition of some morality or other. So it's not whether but which. It's not whether we impose morality. It's which morality we impose. You can't have laws that aren't imposed morality. Every law. So the only question is, whose morality? What God, what authority is this coming from?
Well, and in that sense, it does come down to who do you trust?
Yeah.
So, there's this other side to Christianity as well, which is, Christ himself says, the commandments, this isn't rocket science, people. You don't want to violate the commandments. But beyond the concern of propitiating the wrath of God, you have this is not just an angry guy in the sky. This is your Father. This is a God who loves you.
Correct.
Who knows you better than you know yourself.
Correct.
And loves you regardless of how many times you fall down, as long as you condemn yourself and seek forgiveness and you pick yourself back up.
Correct. And if we abandon him, Isaiah 5:20 says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good, who substitute light for darkness and darkness for light. We are in the middle of clown world where everything is inverted and upside down and twisted and demented. And when we ask the question, how did we get here? The answer to that question is that we tried to be autonomous. We said we can craft our own morality on our own authority using reason. Well, I'd say, okay, how's it going? Right? Drag queens reading to the little kids in the library. That's how it's going.
Reading, dancing,
reading,
and other stuff.
Yeah.
So I think if you do want to go, back or forward, however you want to characterize it, go Christendom mode again.
Right.
You can't really start with the law. You got to start here. You got to start in the heart. That's how you earn the trust, is through that humility.
Right. Basically, think of it this way: if it's not a hearts and minds thing, this is why all of this is predicated on a great Reformation revival and the people turning to God. It's gospel preaching and worshiping God and planting churches. Because otherwise, if you've got the flu, if you've got a bad case of the flu, and you read somewhere that you need to be eating 3 square meals a day, if you eat on top of the flu, you're just giving yourself something to throw up. If we took America as she now is and imposed Christian laws, we're just giving them something to throw up. Right? It has to be the proclamation of the gospel. It has to start with the human heart. It has to start with people turning back to God. But if the people turn back to God, if there is a great revival, if there is a great reformation, and I don't think there's any hope for us if there is not, I think that's the only hope right now. If there is such a great revival, then the laws of that people will reflect that spiritual reality. All right.
Yeah, that great repentance, the metanoia, as they say, the change of heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to save maybe the hardest question for last.
Okay.
We've got a lot of conflicting indicators in society right now. By some measures, there is a sort of, people are noticing that we are in a spiritual war, and that the usual distractions aren't going to cut it to I'll just watch TV until things get better. It's not as plausible as it used to be.
Haley's comment.
Yeah, that's right. But at the same time, you look across different denominations and the retention rates are really bad. And even if you have pretty robust evangelism going on, you still got to deal with that retention problem. Where do you think that's headed, and what do you think the fix is there?
Okay, so in this is a little anecdotal, autobiographical from our experience, but I know other pastors around the country who are in a similar position to us. Mm-hmm. And that is, 2020 was the great proving ground. The lockdowns, the masking orders, the shutdown of the churches was a great pivotal moment for churches. I know a number of churches have gone under and have struggled and losing everybody and everything's falling apart because they folded, right? The churches that stood up to the state are thriving. We are dealing with how to process a refugee column for people all over the country who were chased to Idaho by their blue state governor, or their church shut down, or their pastor and elders flaked on them. And what my experience is very similar to other conservative pastors who didn't capitulate, who didn't buckle during that moment. They've never seen such growth. Right? They've never seen. People are hungry, but they're not hungry for some warmed over nothing. They don't want to go to a church where it's the same tired sermon with a different text every week. Be nice to your neighbor and be a good Samaritan, and here's John 3:16. They want real red meat food, hot and put on the table, and churches that are doing that are exploding. Churches that are trying to drift, trying to be relevant and drift along and let's be winsome. Churches that are doing that are not winsome. Winsomeness is off-putting. If Christian pastors wake up in the morning knowing what they think, knowing what they believe the Bible teaches, and they preach that, and they preach it straight up the middle, and just here it is, this is thus saith the Lord. Instead of coming into church with your hands in your pockets, shuffling along, giving, it seems to me, and we're all broken, and you've got an open Bible. Preach, thus saith the Lord. This is what Almighty God says. He wrote us a book, and He wants you to know what's in the book, and I'm here to tell you. And that kind of confidence is able to withstand the buzzsaw that we're headed for. In 1 John it says, what is it that overcomes the world? Is it not our faith? Right. I don't see how there's any way to stand in this moment without believing God.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about COVID. That was a real line in the sand. It just goes right back to the 40 martyrs when the regime comes in and says, well, you're not going to commune this way, and you're not even going to open your doors.
Right.
That's the red line. Personally, I think, you got all these different elements of the faith. You've got Christ, you got the Bible, you got the church, and the more of those elements come together and form a single experience, the more people hunger for it and the more they draw spiritual strength from it. Douglas Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. Give us a like over there and subscribe and comment below. Do all the things. Let me know who you want me to interview next time. Until then, I'm James Polis. This is Zero Hour, and may God have mercy on us all.